Welcome everyone to this month's March 2025 community meeting. What's going to happen today in today's community meeting? We're going to have some introductions, talk about what we just shipped. We're going to have, I think, one or two demos. We're going to talk about the current and future work, some community news, and then we're going to have some time for Q&A. If you notice the message on the Slack channel or in any of our socials, today we wanted to try something new and encourage you all that if you have any questions or any discussions that you would like to have, you can drop them in the chat and then we can make sure to tackle those at the end of the call. Now let's talk about the team. Yeah, the team is like everywhere. We have people across the globe. Uh, and yeah, this is all over faces. So now for some introductions, I can start. My name is Carla. I'm located in Valencia, Spain. I work for OutZEN. I'm interested in OpenFGA because honestly, I think I was doing authentication for a while. I'm doing authorization now. It's open source. I love open source. So here I am. Where am I in my OpenFGA adoption journey? Still learning. And then, as I say, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. Now, if anyone else would like to introduce themselves, you're welcome to do so.
So we shipped a few things in the last weeks. Still a lot of work going on things that we haven't shipped yet, and in particular around performance. But we keep shipping performance improvements, and the last version we shipped yesterday has mostly that. We also shipped a new version of the Java SDK with fixes, and another version of the IntelliJ plugin that has support for the new version of their IDEs. So if you're using IntelliJ and in particular the new versions, now you can use the OpenFGA integrations. And now I'm going to talk a little about how we are thinking of OpenFGA with a new standard that is being worked in the OpenID organization that is called AuthZEN. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to standardize the APIs that you use when you're making authorization calls, right? Think of a standard API to interact with OpenFGA and other systems. And they started, I think, a little more than a year ago, and they already have some drafts of their specifications. And what we did is we implemented one draft of that specification. Right now, it's in a specific branch that you can run. It's not integrated with FGA yet. And our goal there is we'll integrate it when those other things are more mature, and we can make sure we can keep compatibility for the future and things like that. But we're going to keep iterating and working closely with the team, with this group, to make sure whenever they ship those APIs, we can have support for those as much as we can. And just to give you an idea of how this works, they defined specs for two endpoints that we have in OpenFGA. One is the equivalent of the check endpoint. They are calling it evaluation. And on the one side, you have there the request, the form of the request that they have in AuthZEN. And on the right, you have the check in FGA. Should be pretty familiar to all of you, at least the thing on the right. And on the left is very similar. What we have in user, it's in subject in AuthZEN, the fields type and IDI in different fields, which makes sense. Resource, same thing. Action will be equivalent to the relation on our side. And you can specify context in the AuthZEN call that we map that to OpenFGA. So nothing very surprising here. And they also have an equivalent of an batch check endpoints that they call evaluations. They do, and the idea there is that you can have certain parts of the request that you put in the header, in this case, the subject and the context. And then you can specify the rest of on an array, right? And you can decide, for example, maybe you specify the subject once, and then for each action and resource you send a context, maybe you can specify the subject and the action in the header and have different resources. So this gives you a little more flexibility over we can do in our batch check, where we need to specify all of the check we want to do one by one, right? But it's very easy to map one to the other. And that's what we did in that implementation. Then they also have an application that they called a to-do app. And if you run it, you see there's a way to pick which PDP, which policy engine you want to use, and that there's OpenFGA as an option there. This is the website that you can use. It wasn't working a few minutes ago. Maybe it's working now, but I think they have an issue because there should be data here and there's no data. But demo OpenFGA. So I can add that sub thing. So now there's a to-do item. I'm the owner of that, so I can view it, delete it, depending on the user. I don't have those options. Let me see. I got an error later, but yeah, so I can delete it. And then I can just call it as done, and then I can go and delete it if I want. And the idea here is that I can change the identity provider here, and it will always use the same APIs to call it, and it will just switch in the backend which identity provider it's using. Okay? So this is interesting, but there's another scenario that they are. So here, if you want to learn a little more about how it's done, there's something that is interesting, which is most of the tools, the policy engines they are using are more AVAC style, so they are stateless. They don't have a database of tuples. However, when you need to write a new to-do item in that app, we need in FGA we need to add a tuple that says like now this to-do item is we created a new to-do item is owned by someone, I think that. So what we ended up doing is we ended up contributing an extension to that app that where you can have like a stateful PDPs or authorization services, and there's one implementation for OpenFGA that when you need to create a to-do item and it calls writes, right? And we need to delete one, it calls deletes. And the idea is that if in the future other vendors want to integrate their own like our Reback-like providers in this to-do item in to-do application, they can do it in a similar way. There are still no standards for how you write and delete data from a Reback API. In the moment those standards exist, then yeah, we can use the standard here. But the standard right now for the AuthZEN group is more about the check than the state, right? Because a lot of authorization and policies engine don't have state. Okay? So that is the main focus first on the authorization checks. And then the other thing that they're doing, which is interesting, and I think that is the value that FGA customers could get from something like this, is that they are working with API gateway vendors. So those gateways have support for the OpenFGA protocol. So today, if you want to use OpenFGA with Kong or Amazon Gateway or Envoy, all of those, someone needs to build a specific integration to integrate that gateway with OpenFGA, right? Once there's a standard on how the gateways can call any authorization service, then we don't need to be that integration for each of them, right? All of the gateways that support AuthZEN will work with OpenFGA. And I think that's interesting, right? So that's how our customers and the community can get value from something like this by taking advantage of more gateways and having them easily integrated with FGA. Someone raised a hand. I don't know if someone has a question there. No, it's not raised anymore. Okay.
Okay.
So and the other thing they did here, which I also find interesting, which is they are having this model where they have first an authorization check in the gateway and then another in the backend, right? And the way they're describing this is kind of defense in depth. Right? So we are checking in both places. And the check that they are doing in the gateway, and here is the model that we implemented for that use case, which is very basic. The check in the gateway is more about, can I post to this route or put to this route, right? A very coarse grained based on routes. And instead of being fine grained of, can I actually view this to-do item or delete this to-do item, right? And then in FGA, I would have wanted to just from the gateway directly do the fine grained check. So why do it in one way in the gateway and another way in the API, right? But this is the way they are modeling it in their examples. So we ended up implementing it that way. So this is the model that we have for that gateway scenario, and this is the model that we have for the to-do item scenario. They are all there in this fork in this branch in the repo. And I think that was it. So before going to the next step, any questions about this or comments about AuthZEN? Have you been like hearing anything about it or get in any internal interest on using it for any scenario? Okay, I'll take that. So right, sorry.
Gurleen has a question around like, will OpenFGA be supporting both APIs, like OpenFGA?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, right. I really wasn't looking at the chat. I just forgot the chat.
Just a follow-up on that. So I would assume the AuthZEN APIs would be just simple REST-based APIs. And right now,
Yes, compared to what? Sorry.
no, right now OpenFGA, if you want to talk directly to the server, I think you have to use the gRPC.
Yeah, so I think the way the specification is defined is there's a payload definition, and then they also have the HTTP bindings for that API, right? So I think it's very likely that they have also gRPC bindings for the same API. But right now in the draft, there's only an HTTP binding. The way we build this in OpenFGA, given that OpenFGA is gRPC first, is we implemented the endpoints in gRPC and we expose them in HTTP. Right? So I expect you will have a gRPC API for these two.
Okay.
Good. The other thing, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, just to follow up, and I think in general, a lot of the adopters of AuthZEN so far are not using gRPC. So if this becomes a standard and it doesn't have gRPC bindings, for our implementations, we're still not, we haven't made the decision. Either we might
Yep.
have them as gRPC bindings, or we'd have them as like a kind of, what's it called? Kind of a proxy on top that it redirects our own HTTP handlers.
Mhm.
So we have
Yep.
not decided, but we will follow the spec. So if the spec has only HTTP, we're gonna offer at least that. And
Yep.
we haven't decided if it's built in, proxy on top, any of that. Like, we're just waiting for it to stabilize, but we're trying to at least
Yep.
make sure we support whatever is out there.
Yep. So in the way we build it for this one is not a proxy; it's just endpoints in the OpenFGA server, right? That internally, just so when we call evaluation, it calls the internal implementation of check, and so I like to do it that way. But I mean, we can also discuss what is the best way to do it in the future. And then the other piece here is about AuthZEN, and I want to say something else. Yeah, so potentially there's another way of, so the other thing that could happen is that once you have a standard, you can have SDKs on top of the standard, right? So there are going to be standard SDKs for the AuthZEN API, and you could use those instead of OpenFGA if you wanted. I don't see a lot of value right now, at least, to say I want to use OpenFGA in my application and use the AuthZEN API, because that will give you potentially the way of, yeah, I want to change the implementation of the policy engine and easily, right? However, I think the complexity of the policy engine is more not in the check, is in how you define the policies and all of those kind of things. So it's not that will help migration as much, right? I do see value in a lot of value in the gateway scenario, because yes, that makes the ecosystem better for everyone, right? If there's standards there and you can interrupt that way. Then so I wanted to mention this one here and see if we can have a conversation. I would love to get feedback from you. So we published a couple of weeks ago this document in the OpenFGA documentation, which I basically, what I did here is I collected some patterns. So this is we have this document thanks to you, because these are ways that we've seen people implementing OpenFGA, and we try to capture those here, right? And so to help other companies to implement it. And I'm sure you might have taken these routes with implementing FGA, and also that you might have other adoption patterns that you maybe it's not a pattern because it was only done by you, but things you did when implementing OpenFGA that you think might be important or interesting for other people to follow as a strategy for adoption. And also we love to see if any of you use these patterns when implementing, and if you can talk about it and share some experiences of how that was it and how you did it. So I'm gonna just open it here and go through the document. So something we see often is that when you start with FGA, you already have an RBAC system, okay? And you already implemented RBAC in your application, so you already know you have the concept of roles. You might have the concept of permissions already, like can add member, can delete member, or sometimes you are checking for roles in your applications. So one approach is I will try to implement whatever I currently have in my system with OpenFGA. And after that's done and it's working, I can keep evolving what I'm doing and start adding more resource types and more permissions so I can make that implementation of authorization more sophisticated, right? Doing it this way helps you to have a quick implementation because it's relatively simple to get to an authorization model, and if you have RBAC, and also helps you to start integrating it quickly and without major changes in how you are thinking authorization in your app, right? In this case, we've seen customers, what they do is they just have global permissions, can add member, can delete member, can view member. So they are not per member, they are not fine-grained because their model doesn't support fine-grained yet, okay? It is more like based on the roles. And so this is one way. And if you do this, the way we're gonna call check is, can I add a member in a specific organization? So again, not fine-grained. And a better implementation that still keeps the idea of staying in role-based access control. It will be something where you can start defining your resources, and the permission is still defined in the organization, right? So you want to, if you can delete a resource because you have a role in the organization. So you don't have fine-grained permissions in the resource. However, when you do check here in the resource itself. Can I view resource, right? And that helps you that in the future, you start adding more fine-grained permissions here. Your application code doesn't need to change, and you can still do checks on a specific resource. And if you want to simplify the implementation here, you see if you have this resource here, you will need to have a tuple that connects the organization with the resource. You could do that initially with a contextual tuple. So you know that this resource is for this organization. You send that in a contextual tuple, and then you can call check in the resource itself instead of calling it at the organization level. Make sense? Any questions about this one? Any of you who started implementing FGA started this way of trying to replicate the role-based access control system with OpenFGA?
Yeah, this is more or less what we've been doing to implement this. It was kind of a mix of what you had in that first example and the second example where we have some fine-grained access control, but not completely yet. But like you said, this was an easy way to map the existing roles that we had and switch over to OpenFGA over time, as opposed to trying to do a giant switch all at once or starting from scratch.
Makes sense. And anything you can add here? So something you did different that you or that you believe can enrich this pattern or this example? Also for you, Galene, if you can think of anything.
I don't think so. I think this pretty much covers
Good.
the information that would have been super helpful to have when I first started this.
Good, yeah, better late than never, but yeah. Good. Perfect. And let's see to the other one. The other one is that I kind of hinted it here, which is this way of sending a contextual tuple, which is, and there's a lot of text here, so sorry. But the idea is that when you go to OpenFGA, the goal of OpenFGA is you have a permission, you have all the data to make authorization decisions in your system, okay? And then when you need to make a check, the check is very easy because you just ask, can I view this document without worrying about getting any contextual or additional data to make that decision. Right? So that is the way the system is designed to be used. Right? However, there's a lot of cases where building that synchronization, so putting the data in FGA, might not be simple, right? That implies building usually a synchronization pipeline between your system and FGA, handling dual writes in your system and FGA. And maybe that is too much of a lift when you're starting implementing FGA. Okay? So one option is what if you don't do that, right? So you don't have any data stored in FGA. And what you do is before calling FGA, you first retrieve the data that you need to use to evaluate the policy, and then you call FGA. You can do that with contextual tuples, which is this idea of I send this data in a request, right? All the data I need to make the decision, and then the engine decides what to do. So you can implement FGA that way. It's just that it won't make a lot of sense to do it that way, because if I'm providing all the data, then why should I do a remote call to another service to kind of evaluate that if there's no data there, right? But you can have a hybrid approach where you have some data in OpenFGA, the data that has higher cardinality or is easier for you to synchronize, and then some data that might already be there for example, you have data in the access token that you think you can use to check for a permission. For example, I know in the access token that the user belongs to this group. Instead of synchronizing groups, I can send the data in a contextual tuple. So you can decide how much data you want to put in the system from the beginning and how much data you want to retrieve first and then call OpenFGA. Ideally, at some moment, you will have everything in OpenFGA because that is the best usage of the platform, right? However, as an implementation pattern, you can start anywhere you want from that, from the one side of retrieving all the data and then sending to OpenFGA to the other side, which will be having everything in OpenFGA. So that is the pattern, right? And we explain here how you can do it and some examples of where it can make sense. Again, same question, right? Anyone using contextual tuples for this use case, how you figured out the first implementation you did? Yeah, you just wrote all the data to OpenFGA and that's it, and then you are happy with that, or did you find friction on that and use a different approach initially?
So we just started doing that, and we started doing that exactly for what you mentioned in the document for our access tokens.
Okay.
Access tokens, you can assign which resource it has access to. So like a user could create 10 access tokens with each token define 10 resources, and now you have 100 tuples that you have to store for just that user inside OpenFGA. So we didn't want to do that. Instead, we are storing that in a separate database. And whenever you make a check using an access token, we pull out those resources, shove them into contextual tuple to get the final answer.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that makes sense, right? And ideally, in a perfect world, you will want to avoid doing that because that is more complexity on your side, right? And more latency in that check because you need to go to get the data first, right? And then call check. However, that's a trade-off to make there, and that's why this approach makes sense too in some scenarios.
Yeah, we have a similar thing where one of the permission checks is whether or not you're allowed to view something if you're the one that created it. But in our case, that would mean storing millions of tuples every month in OpenFGA as well as our database. So we decided that duplicating that amount of data wasn't effective. So we're going to just use contextual tuples for that information.
Makes sense too. Perfect. I'm glad these things are resonating with the audience, and so great. Another one that we see that is also interesting is, so you might already have an application that to make authorization decisions is using the claims that you have in a JOT. right? So that is the most common way of implementing authorization today. If you are using OpenAD Connect, at least, or auth, is you get an access token with permissions, and based on that, you decide if user can access a resource or not. And for the applications that are checking permissions, that is easy, right? So there's no additional access. You have the data in the token, you check for that, and you implement access control. The issue with the tokens is that, yeah, of course, they have a limit in the amount of the size. You cannot have all the Google documents I have access in a single access token, right? So there's limits of how you can use that. But for some scenarios, it might make sense to start there too. Right? So I start without touching the backend of my app. They keep using JOTs. But now when I create that JOT, I go to OpenFGA to understand what are the claims that I need to put in the JOT. And depending on, and that implies enriching the access token when it's issued, right? And that implies an integration with the identity provider that you're using to enrich the access token. Right? We have an example here of how it's done in AuthZEN. We're going to add more examples as we find that information. So we can also help how to do it in Okta. And this documentation here is actually not specific to OpenFGA. It's more how you and add custom claims to an ID token, right, or to an access token in AuthZEN. But so if you have examples of how to do it in other platforms, great. The idea is put them here, and to help everyone to take this path also if this makes sense. This is not that common, so the other patterns I mentioned are very common. This one usually happens, yeah, when you are in that scenario of I don't want to touch and I cannot touch the applications that are doing authorization checks. Anyone doing this?
We are doing something like this, but it's a little bit different in the case that we are using the permissions that we get to enrich the API call. Basically, it's skipping the enriching the access token and just going straight to giving the permissions. But the permissions are not like resource based. They're more generic, like, okay, can I view resources? Can I view documents? Can I edit documents? And it doesn't give you the resource ID. So that is something that we could put into the claims themselves because it's not that much heavy. That's one of the things that we're using, but we are starting to get a problem with that. We need to call an API to fetch the access first. Like if there are like 100,000 objects which the user has access to on a view basis, we have to fetch all those access and just say, okay, he can view a resource. So this is a little bit of you can say resource intensive thing, but that's how we're currently doing it, and we hope to see something like a single scope based call, something like can view resource for any resource, something like that.
Yeah, and that is what you would do if you have those relationships between the whatever and the resources in OpenFGA, you should be able to make that call to OpenFGA, correct? Can I view resource?
Yeah, that's correct. But you have to get the objects from there. You can't just simply perform a single check.
Yeah, so you need to put so if you put the objects in the OpenFGA database, you should be able to perform a single check, correct?
Yeah, but the single check will be on specific resource. So let
Yes.
me explain the flow that we're going through. So user wants to see what permissions he has access to, like what type of resources he has access to. Maybe he has access to docs, maybe he has access to sheets. Now he wants to see, okay, if I have access to these two types of resources. At this moment, he doesn't want to know what IDs the resources have, but just what type the resources are of. So in that way, we have all our resources currently in our, you can say, beta implementation. We're using all of these resources we have put in the OpenFGA server. But when we want to know, okay, if the user can view a document, any document, we have to perform a list objects check.
Okay. So what you don't have a permission that you specify, that is this user can view documents. That is not a permission you have. What you have is I can view this specific document, this specific document, this specific document. And then based on if the user can view any documents, they should have the permission to view documents, and that's the one you want to check for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a possibility for this. I mean, it does slightly complicate your model, but as you can have a can view documents on the top, like let's say you're like what your app is, your own platform can view documents. And what you can do is, this is if basically if they have a permission to view at least one document somewhere, then they get that permission. So it'll be like something like can view from a document. Of course, means you have to add tuples to tie the documents to the platform, but
Yeah,
that you can have them as a list objects, or sorry, as a basically a check on the platform. You can have the
yeah.
permission.
So what you're saying there is a potential solution is add another tuple. So you have a tuple today that says like it says we call the higher level type
a document
platform, right?
belongs to an organization, for example.
Perfect. Yeah. So in this case, you have in the organization you have a relation with in the document you have a relation with the organization today, right?
Yeah.
What Raghad is suggesting, if you have the reverse one too, like another tuple that says is for the organization the list of documents, then you can check there, right? If you can view in the organization if you have a document for that organization, and that will be a single check, right? And it will be very quickly because when we find one, it will return quickly. However, that implies adding another tuple.
Yeah.
The other
Adding
approach is
double the
more,
tuples.
yes, right? And if you have a lot, that's a lot, right? And then
Mhm.
the other approach is have a explicit permission, right? When you say, I can view documents and write that and maintain that tuple at the organization level. And with, of course, but that's a single tuple that you need to find out the right moment to put, right?
Yeah,
So
that's the
here,
thing.
I
And right
think
moment to delete as well.
yeah, so it makes sense. So I think there, what you would need is a query, a different kind of query in FGA, right? That is more like it's like a list objects that can return true or false or something like that, right? So is there any object
Something like
here?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking, that if even if the list objects has like a parameter to limit the number of objects that it can fetch, like
Yeah,
maybe just one object or 10 objects. So if it fetches any object, that means the user has permission. It's not
yeah,
the ideal way, but it's very close to the best way.
yeah, makes sense. Perfect, great. Good. I'm gonna keep to the next one, and then this one is more. It's an adoption, but it's kind of a second. It's later. So something that is we see also happening today is that you introduce OpenFGA in your company, right? And now usually you try to start small. So I build it for one specific use case, and sometimes that is a team that needs OpenFGA for building a feature, and they take advantage of this. And then once they are done, they say, okay, guys, this is great. Let's kind of expand the usage of OpenFGA. Or it might be more, you're a platform team and you decide, I want to use OpenFGA across the company. You still need to start somewhere, right? And then you start somewhere, you do something that a test, a POC that is successful, and then you want other teams to start using it. And that implies that you need to convince other teams to start using OpenFGA. And those teams might have their own roadmaps, and they might don't see a lot of value in migrating to OpenFGA now, right? So that process can be challenging. And there are two things that we've seen there that can be helpful. One is, so we have this feature called modular models. That is a way for you to kind of, you probably already know it, but it's a way to decompose a model in multiple sub-modules. So each team in your company will define their own module for the application, the part of the application they own, and then they can be combined in a single model. And then there's a feature in OpenFGA that lets you decide, okay, the credentials that this application uses can only write data to this module. So that kind of isolates the data from multiple teams in a way that, yeah, nobody can mess with the tuples that my team owns. So that gives you a little sense of kind of, of certain guardrails of each team can manage their own model and their own data in a single store. So that can give you some internal confidence that this is a path that you can take. And then the other one that we also see customers implementing is, so let's say you are in a situation where you have, I don't know, 20 internal teams that need to start using OpenFGA. And those teams might not want to learn OpenFGA and learn how to use the APIs, right? And you want them to adopt the solution, So what you're trying to do is, what is the simplest way that they can adopt internally OpenFGA? And with some companies are doing is they are kind of proxying OpenFGA with another authorization service that is internal. And that authorization service is more domain specific, right? So it doesn't have like a write tuple. It has shared document that implies writing a tuple, or can view document that implies calling check, right? And those APIs are easier for each team to understand. If you're sending contextual tuples or things like that, you can do that in that proxy service, and so they don't need to learn about contextual tuples if they are always the same, the ones you send, right? So there's certain advantages from a point of view of adoption to take a path like this. We don't love this pattern because it adds more work to someone implementing FGA. Right? They now need to build this, right? So we are on one side, happy that customers are using this to increase internal adoption of OpenFGA. On the other hand, we would like to find a solution in our product that doesn't doesn't guide you this way, right? So we still haven't, and but maybe at some moment we can help more on the product side to simplify this internal adoption and without the need of putting something like this. Anyone doing this internally, like a proxying OpenFGA with their own authorization service?
Yeah, we kind of adopted OpenFGA. We already had a service for access control with our own policy engine. We essentially just replaced the policy engine with OpenFGA.
Perfect.
One thing I would like to
Yeah.
mention is the reason why we didn't directly do OpenFGA is we have a very strong caching layer in that service, and we wanted to keep it.
Okay, makes sense too. Yeah, so this is one of the scenarios I mentioned here, right? So you already have it. So yeah, if you already have it, that's a great way of adopting OpenFGA is just you replace implementation of your authorization service, right? And that it makes total sense here. Good. And the last one, we run out of time, and is this one we call here shadowing OpenFGA. And this is something that, okay, I know that that they're doing this in Grafana, which is you want to know, you have a model, right? You have you have an implementation today of authorization, right? And you want to replace it, right? But during some time, first, it's likely that both authorization systems will coexist in your customers, right? And also, you will want to know before shipping OpenFGA that is behaving in the same way as your previous system. Okay? So something we see customers doing is that they call their internal system. They see if the existing system will let us access the resource or not. And they also call OpenFGA and for a percentage of the values, or maybe asynchronously, so they don't block the call, but they record if there's any difference. Okay? And once they're confident that, yeah, it's behaving in the same way, they replace OpenFGA, this old system with OpenFGA. Okay? And maybe if you are deploying software to your customers, is when nobody else is using your previous service, you can just get rid of it and use only OpenFGA. But this is a way to also give you confidence of how you can deploy OpenFGA internally. And there's other use case for this, which is also if you're changing your authorization model from one version to the other in a way that is significantly different, and you want to make sure that the previous version and the new version are consistent, you can also do this, right? So you make calls to this OpenFGA, but with two models and compare the results, and then you can decide if, yeah, this is working fine, not. The so anyway, so this is okay, cool. Yeah, we did so perfect. So Gillian, and you did the same things in Docker. That's great. And so maybe there's more patterns that you can share with me, Gillian, that I haven't captured here. The things that you did, and that can help everyone else. I know, Joe. I don't know if you're there. That in your Grafana you're doing these things of trying to write to both systems to keep the data in both. I don't know if you're planning to do this thing of shadowing calls at some moment too.
Yeah, actually, like on our side, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Like on our side, we've gone even an extra step, is that we're also like changing a lot of like user interfaces. So we've ended up like writing like 3 times. So we have like one which is customer facing and like developer portal facing, and then we have like reconcilers that reconcile both into our old system and into OpenFGA. And when we do checks, like we actually like feed from both systems to verify like, okay, like has this resource been migrated yet? Like is it actually agreeing in the decision if like there's information for both, and so on.
Interesting, makes sense. Okay, I think we are, let's just let me go through the rest of the things that we have here, at least for the ones that are more relevant. So you can always check our roadmap there in GitHub. Right now we keep working on some improvements on SDKs and in performance in the core OpenFGA. And in some things in the community. So we are gonna have, so Deepu is gonna present, what is this one? And I don't know which, yeah, sorry, I see Box Days Amsterdam. I was looking at this. Anyway.
Yeah.
So we are going to be presenting there about how you can use OpenFGA with LangChain for RAG in Gen AI scenarios. Then we're going to be in London in KubeCon. So Puvam is going to present with Joe in about how they're using OpenFGA in Grafana. And I will be presenting with the tag security team in the maintainers track the first day about how we are working with that team and OpenFGA. And then so something else that is interesting we wanted to share is that so we applied to incubation, the CNCF, a few months ago, almost a year ago already, and they now moved that to the next part in their project in GitHub, which is ready for assignment. So we are not waiting for we kind of check all the checkboxes to get ready for assignment, and now someone needs to pick the project and do a deeper analysis. And we have a lot of companies that accepted to be interviewed as part of this process. So thank you to all of you, and hopefully this will mean that hopefully this year at least we get incubation, which will be great for the community, and of course we couldn't have done this without you, and we'll be very thankful to all of you if this happens. And I think that's it.
I'll add
So yeah, go ahead.
I'll add to what Andres is saying, like specific around this being a community project. So if you have contributions to make, any changes to make, I mean, ideas, we will be constantly talking about them, how much effort they can take, and like whether the direction of the project is right. But any contributions you feel you want to make, if you feel you want to be a maintainer and you have the resources to be that, reach out to us, like talk to us. Like we're accepting anything that makes sense, so long as it does not derail other people. But join us. Be like, this is a community project, and we want you all to be not just users, like to be part of this journey.
Yeah, and then the last thing is, if you haven't done it yet, so we have a in our community section, we have a file that is called adopters.md, where we have all the companies that that publicly acknowledge that they are using OpenFGA. We have a lot of you already there. And but if you are using OpenFGA in production and you feel comfortable adding your company there, that is super important for us. And more in this flow, that in this process we're going with the CNCF, the more companies that we see that are listed as adopting FGA, that will be great for us. So please consider that. And that implies submitting a PR in our community repo in the adopters.md file, and just adding your company and how you're using OpenFGA. So if you have any question about that, let us know. But that will be very grateful if you do that. Okay, so I think that is it. And you can also follow us in LinkedIn. We share a lot of information in LinkedIn now. So that is also have a page and you can follow it too. That's it from our side. I don't know if anyone has any comments or questions. We have a few minutes now, and if not, we can wrap it up. Thank you very much for attending this community meeting, and we see each other in a month.
Thank you. See you.